Hello, New Hope Church. Pastor John here. I just wanted to do a little video today on Wednesday afternoon to try to answer some of your questions that you might be having or thinking about our planned reopening this Sunday, June 7th. And so I thought I'd take some time to actually record this so that I maybe can communicate better my answers and that give a fuller description than if I just sent out an email or put it on Facebook. So I'm going to attempt to explain whatever rules, requirements, or encouragements we might have of you on that day, on June 7th. We sent out an email, and I know I mentioned, I think in last Sunday, that if you are thinking about coming this Sunday, please contact me. We do have restrictions on how many people we can have in the building, and so we need to kind of have an idea ahead of time if we're going to run into trouble with having too many people or not. And already, from those who responded, it looks like we probably are filled for this Sunday. For those who have either told me or emailed me and said they're planning on coming, I think we're just about full. So if you are thinking of coming, please contact me to make sure that there is room for you. So I want to just go over these this list that I have. We did contact your regular attenders by email and sent out a survey and asked you to respond, and many of you did, and I'm pleased about that. So based on some of your answers to that survey, that's what some of the things that we're going to be doing were somewhat impacted by what you said. So here we go. First of all, we're not going to be taking your temperatures when you come in the building. We're going to assume that if you have a temperature, you know it, and if your child has a temperature, you know it. So please check your children if you are planning on bringing them. Check yourself if you feel anything. But we figure you're adult enough to do that yourselves. So go ahead and take your own temperatures, and if you're sick, stay home. That might be, I know a lot of people did that in the past, but it might be just something that people do more often now, that if they're starting to feel sick, they stay home. We will have our Facebook live videos. We're planning on having a YouTube live video as well, so you'll be able to see the service. You just won't be there in person, and hopefully that'll be okay. So we're not going to take your temperatures. We are going to ask that you do social distance from one another. It's hard to do the whole 6-foot thing, and if you don't have a good concept of how big 6 feet is. So yes, we do encourage you to do that. And especially, I would say, make sure you stay your distance, your social distance from somebody that you think could be a vulnerable adult. Just maintain that distance from them. Not necessarily for your sake, but for their sake, out of respect for them, respect for their health. I don't think anybody wants to pass this virus on to anybody else. It's a serious virus once it's contracted for especially a certain group of people, and nobody would want to see somebody get seriously ill. So just respect the distance thing and give people their space. With that said, I'd also encourage, just keep aware of where you're standing and don't block the traffic flow. We're not putting lines on the floor or anything like that, but if you're standing in the foyer, make sure that people can get around you, especially in the kind of the traffic lane of getting into the sanctuary. If you want to talk with somebody, go and talk off, on a side in the sanctuary. So just don't block people, don't block the flow. Keep aware of your surroundings. And also don't assume that somebody wants a hug or wants to shake your hand. Ask. Just very simply, politely ask if you want to do that. We are not encouraging that. So by saying that, I'm not encouraging that, but I'm just saying as a warning, don't assume that you're just going to come in here and hug everybody because you've been gone for a few months. People may not want that. So I'm not going to stop you. Yes, I'm going to say I encourage you not to do that. I encourage you not to shake hands, not to hug, and yet I am not going to be the police and stop you from doing that. If that doesn't satisfy some of you, I'm sorry, but I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to ask you not to do it. And hopefully that's enough. And it's really just temporary. If you want to look at it that way, we're not saying that these are things that are going to go on and on and on. I'm not a person who says that this is a new norm. I say it's a temporary norm. And so we ask you not to hug and not to handshake. Also, just want to encourage you, we've had these hand sanitizers sitting here for the past few years, and they have a non-alcoholic sanitizer in them that says it's capable of killing 99% plus germs. So we have one here, and we have one down in the nursery too, right inside the nursery door. So those are still there. But we've also bought the alcohol-based sanitizers too. If that makes you more comfortable to use that, we'll have those out too. I saw in the survey that some of you said, I'll probably have my own sanitizer in my purse or pocket, so that's good too. Feel free to bring yours if you'd like. We will try to have doors propped open, like the front door, side door, and we'll probably have the bathrooms propped open as well. The stalls have doors on them, so you're not compromised by having these outside doors open. I would encourage you that might be just another way to not spread any germs. And if it's too warm outside and we have the air conditioning running, then maybe we'll have somebody to open doors for people as kind of the greeter. We're not going to have the greeter hand you bulletins. They'll be on the table. You can pick up a bulletin for yourself. That way, again, not spreading too much as far as germs go. Also, we're probably not going to have home-baked goods for refreshments. We might just have packaged goods for a while, just to minimize, again, any concerns people might have. We also, which is a kind of our rule normally in any other summer, we don't have children's church throughout the summer. So as this being June, we would typically not have children's church this first Sunday in June and all the way through August. So we will be suspending children's church, and that's really just our normal practice, so that's nothing special. But then that does mean that your kids will have to stay in the service with you and be somewhat contained and keep them occupied. Also, we are questioning whether or not really even to have nursery this first Sunday, as we're trying to kind of just get our feet wet in doing this again and making sure we work out all the bugs and have everything in place that should be there. If that's a concern to you, let me know. If you're not concerned about the nursery for your kids, I'd also like to know that, because there's kind of an implicit agreement there that if you put your kid in the nursery, they're going to be touched because they're going to have to be cared for, and they might need their diaper changed. So unless you want to do that yourself, then it's probably better just to keep your child with you. But if you put your child in the nursery and you let the nursery workers care for them, pretty much they're going to be touched by somebody. And that's just basic common knowledge, I guess. So you have to be okay with that. But if you got kids that would be in the nursery, we'll let you know for sure if there is going to be one or if there isn't going to be one this week anyway. Also, just wanted you to know that we will, of course, sanitize after each service every week. So that'll be taken care of. So we're going to do our part about that. But now we come to what might be called the $64,000 question. And if you don't know what that's a reference to, there's an old game show back in the 50s that was called $64,000 question. It came back in the 70s too again. But the $64,000 question is the one I've been being asked all the time. I was asked about it today at the men's breakfast. Masks or no masks? It's interesting. We did the survey, got your opinions. And the opinions of people that responded were almost equally split. It was a 55 to 45 basic difference of opinion. 55%, if I can use that statistic, it's pretty close to that, were people who said they would wear a mask, and not necessarily because they feel they have to wear a mask, but they would wear a mask. And then there also, there were a couple people in between the two decisions, and they were people who said, well, I prefer not to have to wear a mask, but I will if you tell me to. But then there was the 45 or less percent that said, I don't want to wear a mask. No way am I wearing a mask. And within each of these different opinions, there was a varying degree of, you could tell, the person's resolution on this. You know, did they really strongly believe this or just kind of believe this? So you could tell how people were responding, that there were differences of degree in each of these beliefs as well. So as you can imagine, seeing that there is almost this equal split in how people feel about this issue, I should say that no one who really needs to wear a mask because of a health concern is actually probably coming this first week or anytime in the near future. People who really feel they have to wear a mask because of a health concern, or I would even say an occupational concern, because there are people who work in the health field and they feel they need to make sure that they keep themselves free and clear of this virus for the sake of their people they care for the sake of their job, for all of that. So we do have a number of people who really do need to probably not be here the first few weeks, maybe even the first few months. And they're going to want to continue watching at home as well. So my recommendation is, if you feel there's any concern in your mind whatsoever about contracting this virus and what it would do to you, it's probably best if you don't come and you stay at home participating with us. I really hate to say that. I really want to have everybody come back as soon as possible. Not really for a benefit totally for me. There is a benefit in speaking to, like I am right now, speaking to a camera. That doesn't do much for me. Right now I'm seeing my face talking to you. I'd like to see your faces. That actually does more for my ability to communicate to you, but more for our fellowship. That's really the bigger reason. It's hard to have fellowship when it's virtual fellowship. That really isn't even a thing. Yeah, maybe we're all watching the same video, but there's no connection between us, no interaction between us. So I really am looking forward to people coming back for the fellowship that we can have together, but also the worship we can have together. Because when we're all here worshiping, I think it's more meaningful, and maybe it's easier to participate. Because when you're at home, I was in a discussion today about this, other pastors, and they mentioned that, some of the people have told them that during the Sunday sermon, they're up walking around, doing things in the kitchen, doing something in the house, or so we know that you're not necessarily 100% tuned in as much as you maybe would be if you were here when you're watching it at home. And so there's distractions there, but there's distractions here when you're with everybody. So we are hoping that we can just worship together. That's a big thing. And I'm sure you're feeling that too. You're feeling the desire to fellowship, the desire to worship. And that's really, I hope, what you're looking forward to doing when you come back. And I would also say that there was no one in the responses that said they would be wearing a mask and they would be greatly offended if somebody else wasn't wearing a mask. So in those people who said they're going to be coming initially and would come at the first opportunity, no one said in that group, I will wear a mask and I will be offended if somebody else doesn't wear a mask. I guess I could say there was maybe a couple of responses in this group that said they just don't understand why people have such a problem with wearing a mask. And that, quite a few people have to wear a mask for their job when they're interacting with customers or pupils or whomever it is they work with, coworkers. Their job is requiring them to wear a mask. And I know they've said to me that, at first it was uncomfortable, but as they got used to it, it really kind of became a no-brainer. It was just like, okay, it's not a big problem. So I know that based on whatever decision I make, some people are going to be disappointed. Because if we're split, those who think we should wear masks are going to be upset if I don't strongly encourage it. And those who think we shouldn't wear masks are going to be upset and may stay home because they don't agree with that. So I'm not, and I'm certainly not trying to please everybody. I know people always say, well, you can't please everybody. I'm not trying to please everybody. It's just difficult when you see that there's this split. And you really wonder, how would people respond if I just was very dictatorial and said, you know what, we're going to have masks. Everybody here that comes has to wear a mask. It might sound like it's pretty simple to do that, but I'm not sure that that's necessary to be so dogmatic about it. I would say probably the bigger question is, how did we get here? How did we get to the point that this is such an issue? And it's a divisive issue. I've heard people saying that they call them the mask of fear, that everybody who's wearing one is fearful. And that, to me, is a very judgmental statement. You're judging everybody who wears a mask and saying that it is this. I'm sorry, you don't know that. And so I encourage you not to have that kind of an attitude towards it. Then there's those who say, well, they don't do anything anyway. Well, tell that to the Mayo Clinic. You can find an article out there that they say even cloth masks do something. Because what they do, and you've probably heard this and you probably think, don't repeat it, but what they do is they actually keep your projection from going as far out to other people. That's common sense. When you got something over your mouth, it is going to stop things. So I guess what I've wondered is why did this become such a divisive issue? Why did this, does this have to be a divisive issue? That's my question, really. It's politically charged. It's judgmental on both sides. I've heard people on the mask wearing side judge people who don't wear masks as being uncaring about other people, inconsiderate. But then, of course, I've heard the mask or no mask people criticize the other people. You've got to wonder, and hopefully you are, is there anything in the Bible that would allow people to settle this issue or help people? And I want to encourage you, there is, actually. It might surprise you, but there is something in the Bible, in the New Testament, that I think relates to this issue. And I'd like to share a little bit with you from 1 Corinthians chapter 8. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, you'll see what the subject is that was the debatable issue in their day. Paul writes, "Now let's talk about food that has been sacrificed to idols. You think that everyone should agree with your perfect knowledge. While knowledge may make us feel important, it is love that really builds up the church." That's a very important verse, verse 2. Or actually, it's the latter half of verse 1. Anyone who claims to know all the answers doesn't really know very much. That's Paul, the apostle. But the person who loves God is the one God knows and cares for. So now, what about it? Should we eat meat that has been sacrificed to idols? Well, we all know that idols are not really a God, and that there is only one God and no other. According to some people, there are many so-called gods and many lords, both in heaven and on earth. But we know that there is only one God, the Father, who created everything, and we exist for him. And there is only one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom God made everything and through whom we have been given life. And so in that first part there, Paul is bringing up the issue, and it's meat sacrificed to idols. And he hasn't actually given any clear teaching on what to do yet. He's really talking about the background issues. He's talking about why is this probably a problem in the church in that day. And what he identifies is pride. Now, he hasn't said on which side pride lies, but he says pride is a problem. And the answer to pride is always love. And so Paul says that pride is the problem, and people think they have superior knowledge to other people. And I see that in this on both sides. People say, I know this, or science says this. And actually, it's interesting. You can look at a lot of articles where people will say science says this on both sides. And often, they don't quote their sources. And so they're saying something that isn't even backed up by science, but they're saying science backs them up. So it's confusing. I'll admit that. Paul goes on in verse 7 and he says, however, not all Christians realize this. Some are accustomed to thinking idols as being real, so when they eat food that has been offered to idols, they think of it as worshipped, as the worship of real gods. And their weak consciences are violated. It's true that we can't win God's approval by what we eat. We don't miss out on anything if we don't eat it, and we don't gain anything if we do. But we must be careful with this freedom of ours. Do not cause a brother or sister with a weaker conscience to stumble. Now, this is really probably the rule that one of the major rules that Paul is giving on this issue, is that we have to care about each other's conscience. And we have to care about how the other person feels and thinks about the issue. He goes on to talk about this from a weaker and a greater or stronger perspective. And that is true on this issue, this idols, food sacrificed to idols issue. There really truly was a weaker brother, stronger brother issue. Those with a weaker conscience and not a whole lot of biblical understanding probably concluded that it was just wrong to do that because they didn't understand the freedom that we have in Christ. And so Paul goes on to explain here and also over in the second half of chapter 10 that there is a spiritual freedom to eat any food. And I think for himself, he'd freely eat any food that was in the market, not worrying if it was sacrificed to an idol at all, because he saw it as food for his body. And he saw God as the giver of all good things. So there was, on that issue, there was a side that had kind of a weak conscience, and the other side had a stronger conscience. I don't think I want you to try to apply which side is which on this issue, because I don't think you can actually say with any certainty or with any superior knowledge that you know the other side is the weaker side. What if your side's the weaker side? I would encourage you, the apostle is telling us to just be careful of what we do for the other believer's sake. And he goes on and he gives more rules about that. And at the end of chapter 10, I just want to read you his final kind of summation of this. Whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, you must do all for the glory of God. Don't give offense to the Jews or Gentiles or to the church of God. That is the plan I follow too. I try to please everyone in everything I do. I don't just do what I like or what is best for me, but what is best for them. He adds this little clause, which is important, so that they may be saved. So in his thinking, that's the last verse of chapter 10. In chapter 9, he went into why does he do the things that he does, and it's primarily to help people get saved, and so he doesn't try to cause any offense to non-Christians so that they will get saved. So here, now Paul is getting to the end of his argument in chapter 10. He brings in that element of it. I don't want to cause any offense that might cause somebody not to want to get saved and to think that we're all lunatics. He talks a little bit more about that in the rest of the chapters of 1 Corinthians as well, when he talks about spiritual gifts. But on this issue, when Paul was dealing with telling the church whether they should eat meat sacrificed to idols, his basic conclusion was, eat it and don't worry about it. You're not causing an offense to God, because God knows, you know, that those false gods are nothing. And so the meat being sacrificed to them or dedicated in their temple doesn't mean anything, because there are no other gods. So God's not upset with you for doing that. But if you run into somebody who is upset or could be upset by you eating it, he says in chapter 10, it's probably best you don't in front of them. Just so that you don't offend their conscience, because they're perhaps got a weaker conscience on this issue. So how does this relate then? Because I said this does relate. I said, but kind of, because it's not a pure analogy here. You can't say that this is definitely speaking about mask or no mask. But there are principles. The principle is that Paul gave at the end of chapter 10 is, I don't do what's just good for me. I do what's good for others. And I don't just do what I want to do. I think about others. I think that's actually the best correlation to our issue that we're dealing with here. I want to encourage you to wear a mask. Now, I know some of you have told me your reasons for why you don't like wearing masks. And I understand you may have good reasons for why you don't want to wear a mask. But I'm asking you to consider doing it not for your sake, but for your brother or sister's sake. And you may, yes, maybe they are afraid and needlessly afraid of getting this virus, or maybe their fear has been stoked by everything that's going on around them, by things they've heard from the government or whomever. Maybe it's not the most real fear, but it might be real to them. And also, they might truly be a person who could be really harmed if they did get this virus. And probably the scariest thing about this virus is that people can carry it and not even know it for days. And so they can transmit it to others without feeling any symptoms themselves yet. So I'm sure you would hate to have been in church and didn't know you had the virus and passed it along to somebody else unknowingly, and then hear that they really, really got sick. So I know nobody wants to do that. And really, I think we should take this more seriously. But I understand, and I'm not going to kick you out, but if you come and you don't wear a mask, I'm going to really expect that you distance yourself from everybody else. And you don't stand behind people when you're singing, because that does project more. So I'm going to ask that you do use some common sense and really protect other people from the fact that you're not wearing a mask. But I'm asking you to, not demanding that you do. I'm asking you that you consider the needs and the concerns of others above yourself. And I know that I probably will receive some criticism for putting it out this way. But this is where my heart has been going towards. This is how I felt almost from the beginning about it. I'm not a person who walks around outside all the time with a mask on. And when I go into a lot of buildings, I often don't have a mask on, but I do sometimes. And sometimes I do because I can sense that other people might feel better if I did. And I do it for them, not so much for me. And I would encourage you to think about that. And if you have more questions because I didn't really answer them, please contact me. But I would encourage you that we are going to open, and we really want to worship, and we want to be together and have some fellowship. That's going to be great and exciting on Sunday. We also are going to be highlighting our two seniors that just graduated, and that's going to be a special part of the service as well, especially for them and their families, since the seniors didn't get a chance to have a typical normal graduation ceremony. So we're going to focus a little bit on that in the service as well, just to honor them and encourage you to do that. We have Amber and Alex, and if you want to bring cards for them, feel free. That'd be great. So I want to encourage you that we do look forward to being together again, and I do hope that we can not have this as an issue that divides us, but an issue that unites us, and that together in Christ we can just tell God how much we love Him and how much we're thankful that He's cared for us and He's preserved us and protected us and provided for us, and just pour out our burdens to Him, because I know some of you are hurting too, and some of you have had a hard time throughout this. And for you, hopefully this will just be a release of that, and you'll get a chance to worship and fellowship again in person. So we are looking forward to this Sunday, and I'm sorry if this has gotten to be a little long, but I just hope that I've maybe answered a few of your questions and that I've given enough specifics about what we kind of expect. We'll have some signs up and things like that to remind you, but please come with an attitude of caring for your brother and your sister, and wanting to watch out for their health, for their benefit, and for their concerns. So I encourage you that way. And I just look forward to seeing you on Sunday. So God bless you, and may you have a nice, warm evening. Bye-bye.